Hey guys, what's up? It's Jen. Welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be part one of my eyeshadow palette collection for 2019. I did a video exactly like this last year in February and it actually went viral. I think right now it currently has like 2.8 million views. So you guys really like these videos. I find them to be very boring. I don't watch eyeshadow palette collections myself, and just filming it just felt very monotonous, but I got so much good feedback on the last one and you guys were really curious to see what palettes I've added to my collection this year, and I have to say it's been a lot. So much so that I have to break it up into two parts, because if I didn't, I think this video would definitely be over 2 hours long, and most people just don't have time to watch a video that long, so I figured I would just split it up. And I'm also going to be decluttering a few palettes as I go. I'm really not going to let go of that many palettes though, just because I find that having a large collection to reference and to draw from helps me a lot when I'm doing comparisons and dupes, and I do a ton of those. If you've been following me on Instagram, I do so many of them over there as well as here on YouTube. And really I've been collecting these palettes over the last 4 or 5 years now, so I would say a lot of these ones that I'm going to show you I can't even use on my eyes anymore because they're too old. I just really keep them for reference at this point. So anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and stop talking now because this video is already going to be long enough, so I will see you guys in a little bit. Okay, so in my makeup room I have two different areas where I store my palettes, and the first place is this unit right here. I got this from wayfair.com. I absolutely love this unit. It holds my lipsticks in the top and then these 6 cubes in the bottom. I measured them and was able to find these 6 baskets at Target that fit perfectly within each square, and the baskets are really deep so I can hold a lot of palettes in each one, and I group my palettes by brand, so I'm using this unit for brands that I have a ton of palettes within that brand. That way I could fit them all together in one basket. A few of the baskets have 2 different brands together, but for the most part, each basket just holds one brand. So we'll go through these and then I'll show you the other side of the makeup room where I'm holding the rest of my palettes that I only have maybe a few from each brand. So why don't we go ahead and I'll just pull out each basket one at a time and show you what's inside. Okay, so inside the first basket are all of my palettes from Shop Hush. So this includes Bad Habit Beauty, Face Candy, and also Beauty Creations. And the majority of these palettes are dupes for higher end palettes. So I'll let you know as we go along what each palette is supposed to be a dupe for, but there are a few in here that are not dupes. So first let's start with the Royals palette from Bad Habit Beauty. This one is a dupe for the Anastasia Modern Renaissance palette, and I would say this is a dupe in color only. It's not my favorite formula of theirs, but this was the first palette that Bad Habit ever came out with, so I think over time they definitely perfected their formula, but this one just really wasn't that pigmented. I found that I had to really build it up just to get the same looks that I can out of the Modern Renaissance. Next up is the Bad Habit Retro Love palette. And this one is a dupe for the Anastasia Subculture palette, and I actually like this one better than Subculture because it's not quite as powdery, there's not as much fallout, and this was the second palette that Bad Habit came out with, but already the formula had gotten a lot better. It's not quite as pigmented as Subculture, but I don't have to really work with it too hard to get it there, so I really enjoy this one, and I reach for this more than the Subculture palette. Next is the Luna palette from Bad Habit Beauty. This one is a dupe for the Anastasia Norvina palette, and I actually like this one even better. The formula on it is fantastic, and it doesn't have as much fallout as the Norvina palette. The shimmer shades are not as crumbly, so I really enjoy this one, and I reach for this one all the time. And then this one is the Artistry 2 palette from Bad Habit. I just got this one recently, so I haven't used it yet, but they're having a huge sale over at Hush right now, so I stocked up on a couple of palettes that I didn't have yet. And this one is supposed to be a dupe for the Kim Kardashian and Makeup by Mario palette. And then next we have the Atlantis palette from Face Candy. And this one isn't a dupe for anything that's currently on the market, but they did borrow the idea from Tarte. I think it was last year on April Fool's, Tarte had posted to their social media a picture of a palette that looked exactly like this and said that it was called the Icy Betch palette and they were going to be releasing it, and everybody was actually really excited, but as it turned out it was just a joke, and then they sort of got a lot of backlash for it. So Face Candy actually went ahead and made the palette, so if you really like blues, I think this is a beautiful palette. And then next we have the Vice palette from Face Candy. This one is a dupe for one of the Kylie palettes. I'm not 100% sure which one, but when I looked it up, they look pretty much identical side by side. And then next up is the After Party palette from Bad Habit. This one is an exact dupe for the Smoky Obsessions palette from Huda Beauty, and I actually like this one a little bit more than Huda's formula. This one is a little softer and more powdery, kind of easier to blend. Huda's formula can sometimes be a little bit more on the dense side, and I find that this one is just a little bit easier for me to work with. And I think this one, out of all of the Obsessions palettes, is my favorite color scheme, so this is the one that I definitely use the most. And then the next several are also going to be Huda Beauty Obsessions dupes. So this one is After Dark from Bad Habit. And this one is a dupe for the Huda Beauty Warm Obsessions palette. Next we have After Hours from Bad Habit Beauty. And this one is a dupe for the Huda Beauty Mauve Obsessions palette. Next is Aftershock from Bad Habit. I actually haven't used this one yet, but this one is a dupe for the Electric Obsessions palette from Huda Beauty. And then we have After Charge from Bad Habit. And this one's a dupe for the Huda Beauty Gemstone Obsessions palette. And then the last one in that series that I have is Afterglow from Bad Habit. And this one's a dupe for Huda's Coral Obsessions palette. And then next up is the Smoothie palette from Face Candy. And this one's a dupe for the Too Faced White Peach palette. I do like the Too Faced formula just a little bit better than this one. I find that this one's a little more on the powdery side, not quite as pigmented, but I can definitely get the same looks out of this one if I just build up the shades a little bit. Next up is the Milkshake palette from Face Candy. This one is an all matte palette and it's a dupe for the Too Faced Just Peachy Mattes palette. Again, just like the Smoothie one, this one's a little bit less pigmented than the Too Faced, but I can definitely get the same looks out of it if I work with the formula a little bit more. Next is the Pretty Poison palette from Bad Habit. This one's a really beautiful pink and purple palette, and this one is the first palette from Bad Habit that's not a dupe. It's actually an original from them. So I'm really hoping to see more original palettes from them in the future because I really, really like this one. And then next we have the Fantasia palette from Bad Habit. This one is a dupe for the Natasha Denona Tropic palette, but I really did not enjoy the formula of this one at all. I felt like the shimmer shades were hard to pick up, they were a little bit crumbly, and just really overall difficult to use. The mattes weren't super pigmented either, so I really don't use this one too often. Next is the Supernova palette from Bad Habit. And this one is an exact dupe for the Lila palette from Natasha Denona, and I actually really enjoy this one a lot. I think the formula is really, really good on it. It's almost as good as the Natasha Denona one, and if I use these palettes side by side, I pretty much get the exact same looks, and I don't have to work too hard with this one. Another great Natasha Denona dupe is the Bad Habit Solstice palette. This one dupes the Sunset palette, and the formula on it is amazing as well. Next up, we have the Bad Habit Divine palette. This is another one I wasn't crazy about the formula. It was just okay, but this one is supposed to dupe the Natasha Denona Star palette, and while the colors are exactly the same, I don't find these to be as rich or vivid as the original, so this one you really need to work with a little bit, kind of similar to the Fantasia palette, so I don't reach for this one that often since I do have the original Natasha Denona Star palette. Next up is the Aphrodite palette from Bad Habit. This one is a dupe for Huda's Rose Gold palette, and just like the Obsessions dupes, this one I actually prefer to Huda's formula just because it's not quite as dense and difficult to pick up. It's much softer and easier to work with. I tend to prefer really soft eyeshadows, so I really enjoy this one and reach for it all the time. Next up is the Athena palette from Bad Habit. This one is actually brand new. I just opened it. I had ordered a backup because I dropped my original one and a whole bunch of the shades shattered. These are very soft shades, so you do have to be careful with these palettes, but I just find them to be so beautiful and easy to work with. This one is a dupe for Huda Beauty's Desert Dusk palette. Next up, we have the Arabesque palette from Bad Habit. This one is a dupe for Soft Glam from Anastasia, and I love this one even more than Soft Glam. I use it all the time because the shades are not as crumbly, especially the shimmers, as the Anastasia palette is. I also dropped this palette and the black shade shattered, but I honestly don't use the black that much, so I don't mind. I'm still using this one, even though I do have a backup. I want to hit pan on some of the shades first before I go and swap it out for my backup one. Next is the Aura palette from Bad Habit. I also got this one recently during the sale, so I haven't touched it yet, but this one's supposed to be an exact dupe for the Prism palette from Anastasia. And then we have the Inferno palette from Bad Habit. This one is a dupe for the Naked Heat palette, and I find the formula is pretty good on this one as well. Then we have the Artistry palette from Bad Habit. This one is a dupe for the Master palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills, the collab that they did with Makeup by Mario, and I have to say this is an awesome one because the Master palette is no longer available, so if you missed out on that one, definitely pick this one up because I think the formula is almost as good. It's not quite there, but you can definitely make this one work, and these colors are just beautiful. I love the overall kind of earthy vibe that this one has. Next up is the Sahara palette from Face Candy, and I love the colors in this one so much. It's a beautiful palette. It's actually a dupe for the Kylie Nice palette, I think it was, that she came out with last holiday, and I think formula-wise this is one of Face Candy's better ones. It's really good. And then the other palette in that collection was the Amazonia palette from Face Candy, and this one was a dupe for the Kylie Naughty palette, and I really like this one as well. I think it's a really interesting and unique color scheme. Next up is the Esmeralda palette from Beauty Creations. And while this one isn't necessarily a dupe for anything, the colors kind of remind me of the Safari palette from Natasha Denona. I think the formula on this one is okay. It's not terrible. It's not the best either. It's a little bit powdery and you do need to build up some of the shades, but I think it's totally workable and I really like the earthy color scheme. And then this one is the Esmeralda 2 from Beauty Creations. And I find this one to be very similar to the original Esmeralda palette. They're kind of like sister palettes. If you put them together, I feel like they would seamlessly just mesh with each other perfectly. And then next up from Beauty Creations, I have the Tease Me palette. And this one is a few years old now. I want to say it came out in 2016 or 2017, so I've had this for a while now. But it's actually an unintentional dupe for the new Nudes palette from Huda Beauty that came out this past fall in 2018. So I find them to be extremely similar, not exact, but I just love all the rosy shades in here. I reach for this one all the time. And then next we have the Wild palette from Face Candy. And this one is really beautiful. It's supposed to be a dupe for the Kat Von D Saint and Sinner palette. I just got this one recently as well during the sale, so I haven't touched it yet, but I can't wait to dig into it because I'm just loving all of these colors. And then next we have this palette from a brand called Okalon, and it says matte eyeshadow, and on the inside it looks very similar to one of the Venus palettes from Lime Crime. This one now for quite a few years. I think it was my first Shop Hush purchase before they even had Bad Habit palettes, so I found this to be a very, very close dupe to the Venus palette, and the formula is actually really good on it too. Next up is the Bad Habit Dream State palette. This one is all pressed glitters, and it's supposed to be a dupe for the Fenty Galaxy palette. And then we have Disco Fever from Face Candy. I just got this one as well during the sale. This one is a dupe for the Too Faced Chocolate Gold palette, which is one of my favorite palettes, so I'm not holding out hope that this one is going to be as good a formula as that one. I figured it could be just maybe an affordable backup for that one in case it ever goes missing or they stop making it. And then next we have the Boudoir palette from Beauty Creations. I've also had this now for quite a few years. This was another one of my first purchases from Hush, and it's just a really nice overall neutral palette. I think the formula is pretty good on it. I wouldn't say it's as good as some of the Bad Habit palettes, but it's not bad. And then next is the Beauty Creations Irresistible palette. This one's also a dupe for the Modern Renaissance palette, and I have to say the formula on it is pretty good. These mattes are super pigmented. The shimmers are okay. I don't think they're as intense as Anastasia's formula, but you can make them work if you wet them. And then I have two more Beauty Creations palettes. The first one is Sugar Sweets. The packaging on this reminds me a lot of the Too Faced chocolate bars, and it has kind of like a sugary scent to it. I wouldn't say it's chocolate necessarily or vanilla, but it's definitely just a really sweet scent, and I think the formula is decent on this one as well. And then this one is the Sweetest palette from Beauty Creations, and it comes in very similar packaging. This one is really warm toned, and it almost smells to me like the pink sugar fragrance from Aquilina. It's really delicious. I love when I open this palette, I always have to smell it because it smells so good. And then we have the 24 karat gold palette from AS Cosmetics. This was a collaboration that Shop Hush did with a YouTuber, I think Amber Scholl. And inside it just has really pretty neutrals. It doesn't have a lot of mattes in here though, so I really haven't used this one too much. It just has 1, 2, 3 mattes and all the rest are shimmer or glitter shades. So like I said, it's a pretty palette, but I really haven't reached for it all that much. And then the last 5 palettes are the Pat McGrath Mothership dupes from Bad Habit. So this one is Cult Mania, and I did a video on this one. I thought the formula was really, really good. I haven't tried any Pat McGrath palettes, so I can't compare it to those, but I just found it so easy to work with and really, really pigmented. I would say more so than their regular line of palettes. And then this next one is the Cult Mayhem palette. This one's more of a colorful one, and it's really all shimmer shades except for these last 2 here, which are more of a satin, but there's no mattes in this one at all. And then this one is the Bad Habit Mythos palette. I just got this one recently, but I'm really liking this color scheme and can't wait to try it out. I love how it's neutral, but with just a few pops of color. This green is absolutely gorgeous. And then we have the Cult Mystere palette from Bad Habit. And this one also has some really beautiful, unique colors in here, so I can't wait to try this one as well. And then the last one in the collection is the Cult Mystics palette. This is the first one in the series that Bad Habit came out with, and I wasn't too impressed with the formula of this one. I felt like they got better as they went along for sure. A few of these glitters were just really flaky and hard to pick up, so I really don't reach for this one that often, even though it's neutral and I feel like the colors would be easy to wear. All right, so basket number 2 is BH Cosmetics. I definitely have a lot of their palettes, starting with the Illuminate by Ashley Tisdale palette. I kept the plastic sheet on this one just because it had the names of the shades, but I really didn't use this one too often. I found it to be powdery. Even though it does swatch really nicely, it felt like it just kind of blended away to nothing. I'm probably going to go ahead and just declutter this palette because I rarely use it and I think it's so old at this point I probably don't even want to. And then next we have the Warm Stone palette from the Marble collection. I got so much use out of this palette when I first got it. It has a really nice mix of warm and cool shades in it and just really pretty wearable neutrals. It also has a really nice formula. I believe this one is still available. I don't think the other one in the collection is, but I did see this one on their website not too long ago. And then next up we have the original Carly Bible palette. This one is so old that I never use it anymore, but I'm keeping it mainly for nostalgic reasons, just because this palette was so hyped and so huge. And I figured at some point I definitely want to do a video, like a flashback type video of the most hyped palettes and things like that. So I do like to hang on to ones that were really big in their time. Next, I have a few palettes from the Glam Reflection collection, and this one is the Smoke palette. This one gives me subculture vibes just a little bit. I really like all of the cool tones in this one, and it's not what you would normally think of when you think of a smoky palette because it does have some warmer tone shades in there as well, and a lot of smoky palettes are all just blues and grays, so I do like that they added some warm tones in here as well. I think it just makes for a really interesting mix. And then next is the Glam Reflections Gilded palette. And just like the name suggests, this one has a lot of golds and bronzes in here. It's a really pretty warm tone palette. And then the last one in this collection I have is the Rosé palette. And this one is more neutral overall. It also has a lot of cool tones in here with a couple of warm shades. And overall, I would say that the formula of these Glam Reflections palettes is really good. I was impressed by them for sure. Next up, I have the B by Bubs Beauty palette. This was a collaboration that they did with Bubs Beauty a couple of years ago, and I really didn't get a chance to use it that much, although I do like the colors in here, and I probably should take this out more before it completely expires and I can't use it. And then next is the Love in London palette. This is a newer palette in their collection. I did a video on this, and this is one of my favorite palettes in a long time from BH Cosmetics. I just really love the color scheme in here, and I reach for this one so often lately just because it's just so wearable, has a nice mix of warm and cool shades, and the formula on it is awesome. And then another palette that they released with the Love in London is the Hangin' in Hawaii. This one is a neutral palette with a few pops of coral and pink, so it's not as interesting as Love in London for sure, but the formula is just as good. Next up, we have the Royal Affair palette. I thought that the color story of this palette was really unique and interesting. There's some really beautiful shades that you don't see too often, like this one here at the drugstore. The formula in this one was a little bit lacking. It's definitely not one of their better ones. It's not terrible by any means, but it doesn't compete with those two that I just talked about, the Love in London, Hangin' in Hawaii, and also the Zodiac palettes, which you'll see in a few minutes. It's just not quite there. It kind of reminds me of their older formula a little bit, but again, not too bad. Next up is a Weekend Festival, and this is definitely one of BH Cosmetics must-have palettes. The formula on this one is awesome, and I love all the bright, vibrant colors. I haven't used this one since last summer, but as the weather warms up, I'm sure I'm going to be pulling it out and using it again. This one might be my favorite BH Cosmetics palette of all time. It's the Desert Oasis palette. This one has some really gorgeous neutrals, a few pops of color like the blues and this coral shade down here. It's actually a close dupe for the Sultry palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills. Even though it doesn't really look like it, I think the blues kind of throw you off a little bit, but cover them up and it is very similar to Sultry. I did a dupes video a while back and I swatched them together and they look so incredibly similar. But not only that, this formula is the best that BH Cosmetics has ever done. It is so high-end feeling. It's so creamy, so buttery. The shades just blend like a dream. It's a beautiful, beautiful palette. If you're going to buy one from BH Cosmetics, it's got to be this one. Next up is the Zodiac palette. And this one is probably my second favorite from BH Cosmetics. The formula is fantastic once again, and I like it because it's colorful, but it's not too colorful. The colors are more muted, and I find that I can wear them more easily in my daily life because I do prefer neutrals, but if I want some color, I definitely reach for this one because I just love how understated they are and how beautiful the formula is. Next, we have the Zodiac Love Signs palette. This is the second one they released in the collection, and while I do like it, I'm not as crazy about it as I am with the original. The formula is a little bit different, and I did talk about this in a video that I did comparing these two. The ingredients are definitely a little bit different, and these just don't feel as rich and creamy and buttery. They're not bad by any means, but they're just not as impressive as the original Zodiac. And then next we have the newer Carly Bible palette. This is the deluxe edition. And as you can see, I haven't even touched this one yet. I was still using the original for such a long time. And I got this one just to have as a backup when the original one was too old to use, which I would say is definitely now. So I think I'm going to go ahead and start using this one. It does come with a few additional shades, but I really, really love the original. So I'm kind of excited to rediscover it and use this one. Next, I have a few of these little mini palettes. The first one is Midnight Affair. And I think the formula on these is okay. It's not my favorite from them, but again, not terrible. This one is Moroccan Sunset. And this has some really pretty warm tones. And the last one in this collection that I have is Afternoon Rendezvous. This one is a very neutral palette from here up. It's just browns basically. And then on the bottom you have a couple of berry tone shades and a black. So it's kind of a strange palette and it's not really one of my favorites. Next up is the Wild Child Baked Eyeshadow Palette. I'm not even sure if they make this one anymore, to be honest with you, and I probably shouldn't use this because it's years and years old. I didn't really use it that often, so I think I'm going to go ahead and declutter this one as well. I also have the original Shan XO palette. I absolutely loved the shades in here, and a lot of people kept saying that this was a dupe for Kylie palettes, but this one actually came out before Kylie's original palette. On the back, it also had 9 different lipsticks. I never even touched these because I don't normally use lipstick palettes, but anyway, I'm probably still going to hold on to this just for nostalgic reasons. This was another really popular palette at the time. Next we have the Wild and Alluring Baked Eyeshadow and Highlighter palette. This was an absolutely beautiful kind of mermaid inspired palette. I loved it. You had a blush and a highlight on this side and these baked marble eyeshadows. It was absolutely gorgeous and I really wish they still had this, but I've been looking on their website and I cannot find it anywhere. So sadly it's been discontinued. I think mine is probably 2 or 3 years old. So it's not likely something that I'm going to want to use much longer, if at all, but I do think it is super pretty. Next, I have the Zodiac Capricorn palette. And these are little mini Zodiac palettes that BH started doing. It doesn't have the baked formula in here. It has some regular pressed shimmers, mattes, and then a baked highlight in the center. And I really enjoyed this one a lot. So I'm definitely going to go ahead and collect all 12 of them. I also have Zodiac Aquarius, and this is the second one that was just released recently. I think it was last month. This one has more of a water vibe. It has all those blues in there and a couple of neutrals. Next, I have the Pride and Prejudice Zombies Eye and Cheek palette. I don't believe they make this one anymore either, and while I did like the color scheme and that it had some face powders in here, it wasn't their best formula for sure, so I really didn't use this one all that much. Next I have the Gold Rush Eye and Cheek palette, and I believe this one was a holiday release either last year or the year before. And this one is just like the Pride and Prejudice Zombies in the way that it's laid out. Again, not my favorite formula from them. It was kind of powdery and not super pigmented. Next, I have a few of their baked palettes. The first one is Solar Flare. And this one is an all shimmer palette. I don't reach for it that often, but these baked shadows are so good because you can use them wet or dry. And wet, they are super metallic and just really pop on your lid. Sometimes I would reach into this one just if I wanted a really vibrant, bold lid shade, but I haven't used it in quite a while. Another baked palette is the Supernova palette. And this one is more neutral than Solar Flare. It actually, now that I'm looking at it, reminds me a lot of the original Zodiac palette. You have a lot of neutrals in here and just a few pops of color with those blues and greens. And then the last baked palette I have is Aurora Lights. This one is much more of a vibrant palette. And again, I'm kind of seeing some similarities in the Zodiac Love Signs palette. So I think it would be interesting to do some comparisons between these older baked palettes and the new Zodiacs. Next up, I have the Modern Neutrals palette. I was really excited for this one because it's an all matte palette and there really weren't a lot at the drugstore at the time. The formula on this one is okay, but I felt like the older BH Cosmetic palettes that came in these plastic packaging that kind of look like they're private label, the formula really wasn't the greatest. It was a little more powdery and just blended away easily. They weren't super pigmented, so I really haven't reached for this one too much. And then I have another palette just like that one. This one is the Nuvo Neutrals 26 color blush and shadow palette. This one came out a little bit more recently. I think it was a summer release and I really liked the color story, so I bought it, but was kind of, again, disappointed with the formula. The blushes I thought were really good, but the eyeshadows were not as pigmented as I would have liked. And then last but not least is the Blush Neutrals 26 color eyeshadow and blush palette. And just like the other two, I really haven't used this one that much just because the formula isn't the best. The blushes are nice, but I do have some all blush palettes from BH Cosmetics that I really enjoy, so I tend to use those and not reach for these palettes just for the blushes. So moving on to basket number 3, this one has all of my Tarte and Too Faced palettes. First, I have the original Tartelette palette. This is a really nice all matte palette with a nice mix of cool tones and a few warm tones as well. I really like the formula on these. Next up is the Tartelette in Bloom, or Tartelette 2. This palette has consistently been in my favorite palettes for many years now. It's just the perfect neutral palette. You have warm tones, cool tones. It's laid out in such a way that it makes it really easy to create one solid look all the way across the palette, or you can just mix and match. But I think the formula is amazing. I think the colors in here they picked are just perfect. If you love neutral eyeshadows, I feel like this one is a must-have. Next up is the Tartelette Toasted palette. This one came out around the same time as the Naked Heat palette from Urban Decay, just when all of those warm tones were really happening. So I do like this palette a lot. I don't reach for it as much as the other Tartelette ones, but I did enjoy this one more than the Naked Heat just because it's not overall as dark as the Naked Heat. There's a lot of lighter mid-tone shades in here that I feel like make this one a little bit more wearable than the Naked Heat, at least for me with fair skin. Next up is the Tarteist Eye and Cheek palette. This one was just a little mini palette that they had come out with 6 eyeshadows and a blush. I really love this blush color, and the eyeshadows are very neutral. They have a little bit more of a rosy tone to them. It was just a really pretty travel palette. Next is the Energy Noir palette. This one's another travel palette. It had a really sort of deep dark vibe to it, and I did not enjoy this one at all. I loved the blush, but the eyeshadows were really hard to work with. They were hard to pick up and got hard pan very quickly, so I'm probably going to go ahead and declutter this one just because I never use it. Next I have the Styled by Harush palette. This one was a collaboration that they did with Harush, and it was a really popular palette for a while. Again, just in that same sort of travel format with the large blush and then 6 eyeshadows. This was more of a warmer tone palette, and I really love this one. I used it a lot when I first got it, and it's one of those things where I just put it away and then forgot that I had it. Next up is this little mini Dream Big palette. I really didn't get a ton of use out of this palette. It was small and it didn't really have a lot of mattes. It just had this one matte ivory and then this deep matte brown shade, so I really didn't pick this one up too much. Next is the Goddess Glam Eye and Cheek palette. This one was another one of those mini palettes, and it really was not the best quality. Even the blush and the highlighter got hard pan and were difficult to pick up. And I find that with some of Tarte's limited edition palettes, they just were not made as well as the permanent ones like the Tartelette palette. So I think I'm going to go ahead and declutter this one as well because I really never used it. Next we have the Aspen Ovard palette. This one had 9 eyeshadows, a blush, and a highlighter, and was just a really gorgeous, soft, easy-to-wear neutral palette that I really enjoyed. I think I did a video on this a while back, and initially I wasn't a fan of it because I felt like it was too close to some of their other palettes, but then over time I ended up really using it a lot and loving it. Next I have the original Clay Play palette. This was one of my favorite Tarte palettes for a while when it first came out. It has 9 eyeshadows and 3 contour or bronzer shades. I think the formula is fantastic. It blends really well. Everything in this palette is matte as well. But then they also came out with Clay Play 2. And I was initially kind of annoyed that all of the eyeshadows were the same as in the original, except for these 3 shimmer shades that they added to this palette. But the more I used it, the more I realized I actually reached for this one a lot more than the original, just because you also get a blush and highlight in here. And I do like the addition of the shimmery eyeshadows as well. I just find this whole palette to be really versatile. It's an awesome travel palette. Next we have the Tarteist Pro palette. This is one of the first palettes I remember Tarte coming out with that actually had color versus being all neutrals like they had in the past. And I thought the formula was okay on this one, but it really wasn't my favorite. I didn't reach for this palette all that often. And then I also have the Tarteist Pro Remix palette. This one I liked a lot better. I think the formula is much improved, and also it has a mix of matte and shimmer shades in here, as well as these 4 on the side. And I just really, really like this palette. I love the looks that I've created with it. Next up is the Maneater palette. This is the newer one that they had released after the original, which was limited edition. Then they brought this back with the addition of a black shade. And I do have the original one. I haven't even dipped into the new one yet just because I was using up the original and I really didn't care too much about the black. I was also very annoyed when I got the new one, thinking that it was going to be a little bit different because in the promo shots, the colors did look a little different than the original. So I thought it was just going to be more of a sister palette. And then when it arrived and it was the exact same palette just with a black shade, I was a little bit more than annoyed, but I just hung on to it because I really do like the original, and I figured I could just start using this one once I was ready to declutter this one. Next is the Sex Kitten palette. This one was actually sent to me by the brand last year, and I really haven't tried it yet. It's just more of an overall smoky palette, which isn't something that I normally reach for, but I just kept it in case I want to do comparisons, and I may dig into this at some point if I really want to do a smoky eye. Next is the Tartelette Tease palette. This was just a little mini version of the original Tartelette palette, and I thought this was so cute. I love taking this on travel with me. It's adorable. Another one very similar to that they had come out with is the Tartelette Flirt. This one is set up just like the Tartelette Tease, but it's more of a mini version of the Toasted palette with those warm tone shades. And then I also have the Tarte Pro To Go. This was a mini version of their Pro formula, and I like this one so much more than that original Pro palette. I just thought that these shadows blended really nicely. It had a perfect mix of shades in here, so I used this one a ton. Next is the Make Magic Happen palette. This was a newer formula that they tried. It was almost like a cream to powder formula, and I believe that it was poured instead of pressed into the pan, so it really didn't create any kind of fallout. It actually reminds me of Doll 10's eyeshadow formula. It's very, very easy to blend and apply to the eyes. It doesn't swatch the best, but this is one of those formulas that I feel like applies a lot better than it swatches. Next, we have the Buried Treasure palette. This one is also one of those cream to powder formulas. I used this a bunch when I first got it, but then I kind of forgot about it. And just looking at it now makes me want to go back and start using it again. It's really pretty. Next up is the Rainforest of the Sea eyeshadow palette. This is the original one, and I love this one so much. This is actually the second one I owned. The first one I got dried up a little bit. This one is more of a cream to powder formula again, so it doesn't last as long as a powder eyeshadow formula would. So this is my second one just because I loved it so much. This one is the Rainforest of the Sea Volume 2. I had also gotten a new version of this one as well, just because it's a really nice neutral palette, and again, I love the formula. Then next up is Rainforest of the Sea Volume 3. This one was probably my least favorite of the three just because all the shades were really shimmery and glittery. You only get one matte shade right here, which is this ivory, and the rest of them just had a ton of glitter. So I found myself to be kind of limited in the looks that I could create with this one. Next, we have the Love, Trust, and Fairy Dust palette. This is a more recent release. I want to say this one came out last year in 2018, and I really thought that the shades in here were pretty. It's not my favorite palette or one that I reach for constantly, but overall I thought the formula was pretty good on it, and I liked the rosier tones in here. And then this one is the Ladies Night palette. And I believe I got this one in a whole set from QVC. It came with a bunch of other products. And this one, again, the formula wasn't the best just because it was part of the set and not a standalone palette. I'm not even sure that they make this one individually, but I really didn't reach for it that often. So I'm probably going to go ahead and declutter this as well. Next, we have the Be a Mermaid and Make Waves palette. I initially bought this one for the cute packaging, but the formula is really, really good on this. And I loved the warmer tone looks with the few pops of blue. It actually was very similar to the Beached palette from Urban Decay that came out right around the same time. There was kind of a trend of this color scheme going around over the summer, so I definitely don't regret this one. I thought the formula was really good. And then next we have the Sizzle palette. And this was the latest version of the Rainforest of the Sea palette, so basically Rainforest Volume 4. And this one had a lot of warmer tones in it. It did have a couple of matte shades, so again, I don't like this one as much as the first or second one, but I did get a little bit of use out of this one. I should probably go back and try to play with this a little bit more as well. And then next we have my Too Faced palettes. The first one is the White Peach palette. This one wasn't super popular and actually had a lot of negative reviews. A lot of people thought that the formula was chalky. I happen to personally love this one. As somebody with fair skin, I think these colors just suit me really, really well. Unfortunately, I did drop it in the bathroom the other day and this shade shattered, so I was really kind of upset about that, but it wasn't one that I used a lot. It was like a glittery topper. I'm just going to go ahead and use the palette without it for now, but I do also have the dupe from Face Candy, so if I really wanted to use this shade, I could just pull from that one. And then next is Just Peachy Mattes. This one is an all matte warm tone palette, and I just love this one a lot. I think that the formula is really good. It blends beautifully, and I love the colors. Next is the Natural Eyes palette. This is the newer version of their Natural Eyes palette that they released last year. I love the packaging, love the formula. These colors are absolutely beautiful. This one has a mix of both shimmer and matte shades in it. And then this one is the Natural Matte palette. This one came out at the same time as the Natural Eyes palette, but this one has all matte shades. This is a really nice one as well, but I think I used the Natural Eyes one a little bit more than this one. And then next up is the Sugar Cookie Mini palette. This one came out for holiday 2018, and it's just a super cute little mini travel palette. I took it on a couple of trips with me, and I really like the formula a lot, and I think the colors are pretty as well. And then at the same time, they also released a Tickled Peach mini palette. This one is set up the same way. It just has peachier colors in it. And then I also have the Chocolate Bonbons palette. I just got this one over this past summer, even though it's been out a while. Ulta had it on sale for 50% off, so I bought it just to add it to my collection. I love the chocolate palettes from Too Faced, and this is one that I didn't have, plus I really like the cool tones that are in here as well. And then next we have the Chocolate Gold palette. These shimmer shades are some of the most buttery pigmented shimmers I have come across in most of my collection. I think it's just a gorgeous palette. It also gives you some basic neutral mattes to help you create looks with it. I just absolutely love this one so much. And then we have the Gingerbread Spice palette. This one just came out this past fall, and I really love the color scheme in here. As soon as I saw this one teased on Instagram, I knew I was going to buy it just because it just has those really rich warm tones, but it's not an all red or all orange palette. You also have your greens in here, purple and golds. It's just a really beautiful color scheme. And of course, we have the original Sweet Peach palette. I was a little bit late to the party with this one. I picked it up probably a year after it originally launched just because it got so much hype and then it disappeared for a while and I wasn't able to get it. But when they finally went ahead and re-released it, I grabbed one, and I really don't use this one as much as I thought I was going to. But looking at it now, I'm kind of excited to take it out and start playing with it again. Next up is the I Want Candy palette. This one is a collaboration they did last year with Candy Johnson, and I really didn't use this one that often. I thought the formula was pretty good, but overall I just found the color scheme to be a little bit boring. I do like a neutral palette, but I don't know, there was something about this one that just really didn't stand out that much to me. Next I have the Pretty Rich palette. I just got this one very recently, a few weeks ago, so I haven't had the chance to play with it at all. And I heard that the reviews were kind of mixed on this one, so I was thinking about returning it, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. And then last but not least is the Natural Love palette. This one was another gorgeous palette. You got so many different shades in here, and I love the overall lighter vibe of it. It just went really well with my fair skin. I think they're about to release a new version of this coming soon. This one's been discontinued for quite a while, but I do still reach for it every so often. All right, so moving on to basket number 4, we have my Anastasia Beverly Hills and ColourPop palettes. First up, we have Modern Renaissance, and the unfortunate thing about these palettes having these soft covers is that they get really filthy dirty. This palette is an absolute classic. I bought it when it first came out, and I use it still all the time. And then next we have Soft Glam. I think I like the shades in this one even better than Modern Renaissance. They're just a little bit softer and easier to wear for every day. And while the formula of this one is really good, particularly the mattes, I find that the shimmers can have quite a bit of fallout, so you really have to be careful with those when using this palette. Next up, we have the Norvina palette. This is another beautiful color selection that I was attracted to immediately when I first saw it. I just love the pinks and purples and neutrals. It's just a beautiful, easy to wear palette. Next, we have the Sultry palette. This is the newest one in the collection, and I really haven't had too much of a chance to play with this one yet, but I do find that the formula is a little bit more like Modern Renaissance. The shimmer shades hold together a little bit better than they do in Soft Glam and Norvina. And then next we have the Prism palette. This one has a few really beautiful brights as well as some darker, smokier shades and some neutrals mixed in. And the formula of this one I find is different than a lot of the other palettes in the collection. These shimmer shades hold together really, really well. They're very rich and buttery, and the mattes are super pigmented as well. And then next we have the Subculture palette. I really haven't used this one too much because I tend to reach for the Retro Love one from Bad Habit. It's just a little bit less powdery than this one. Next we have the Master palette by Mario. This one is one of my favorites. It has an awesome formula, very similar to the Modern Renaissance. It's just the perfect balance of softness, but it also holds together without too much fallout. Plus, I love all the earthy tones in here. And last but not least, I just have a palette that I created with some of their single eyeshadows. I put this one together a few years back when I think I only had the Modern Renaissance palette at the time, and I just wanted to try some of their singles, so I put them together in this palette when they were having a Black Friday sale. All right, and then moving on to ColourPop, this one is the Brown Sugar palette. This is one of their smaller 9-pan palettes that comes in the hard plastic case, and I really love the shades in here. It's a neutral palette, but it's just so warm and pretty, and I love the looks that I create with this one. Next, we have the Take Me Home palette. This is just a small little mini palette that had launched, I believe, when they were back at Sephora a couple of years ago. And I really haven't used this one in a while, but when I first got it, I used it all the time. Next, we have the Ooh La La palette. And this is another 9-pan palette with really bright pinks and purples. Next up, we have the Soul palette. And this one has warm neutrals with a few bright pops of coral in it. Next, we have the Mar palette. And this one has mostly neutrals with a few pops of blue and turquoise. And then we have the Sweet Nothings palette. This one is one of my favorites. It has really soft pinks, purples, and neutrals. It goes really well with my skin tone. And then we have Give It To Me Straight. This is another favorite of mine. I love the mix of rosy neutrals, and this one has quite a few transition shades in it as well to choose from, so I can create a lot of looks with this palette. Next up, we have Double Entendre. This one is almost an exact dupe for the Tartelette Toasted palette. I did swatches of them together on my Instagram page a while back when this first came out. It's just a really nice warm tone palette. Next up, we have I Think I Love You, and this one is just full of neutral shades with one pop of yellow. And then we have the Good Sport palette. And this one quickly became a favorite of mine. I used it so much in the fall. It has a beautiful, unique color scheme, and I really created some beautiful looks with this one. Next up is the She palette. And to be honest with you, this isn't one of my favorite ColourPop palettes. It's not terrible, but I really just don't reach for it that much. Next, we have the Rendezvous palette. This one came out around the holidays for 2018, and it's just a really beautiful jewel tone palette with a few neutrals. I absolutely love this one as well. And by the way, the formula on all of these palettes is fantastic. I don't know if I mentioned that, but the reason I have so many ColourPop palettes is because the formula is amazing and they are so affordable. Next, we have the Element of Surprise. This one is mostly neutrals with some purple and pink mixed in. Next, we have the Yes Please palette. I believe that this was the first pressed powder palette that they came out with, and it's a really good dupe for the Natasha Denona Sunset palette. Next up is Dream Street. This one was a collaboration with Kathleen Lights, and it came out around the same time as the Tarte Be a Mermaid palette and the Urban Decay Beached palette, when we were seeing a lot of these warm tone palettes with a few pops of blue and turquoise. And then we have the My Little Pony palette. I just thought this one was really soft and pretty, and I loved wearing this one in the spring and summer. Next, we have the Zodiac palette. This one is another Kathleen Lights collaboration. And as you can see, I haven't played with this one at all yet. When I got it, I was cleaning up my makeup room and I just put it away and I completely forgot to take it out. So I definitely need to start giving this one some love. Next up is a collaboration that they did with Becky G. This one also has some really rich warm tones. It looks a lot like the Rendezvous palette and a little bit like Dream Street. It has those pops of turquoise with all the warm tones. And then next we have the Chasing Rainbows palette. This is another one that I purchased for the collection, but I haven't used it yet. And it just has some really fun bright colors with a few neutrals mixed in. Next we have It's a Princess Thing, which was a collab with Disney. This one is one of my favorites. I think all the really soft colors go well with my fair skin tone. It's just beautiful. Next we have All I See Is Magic, and this one was a holiday 2017 release. This was another favorite of mine. I still use this one to this day. I'm kind of sad that it was a limited edition because I love all the colors in here. It's really colorful but also understated and a bit muted, so it allows me to play with color without using anything too bright. Next we have the Golden State of Mind palette. I believe this one also launched when ColourPop first came to Sephora, and this one honestly was not one of my favorites. It's an all shimmer palette, and I just found the formula to be lacking and not as good as their other palettes. Next we have the Through My Eyes palette. This is another warm tone palette with some turquoise and yellow and some coral mixed in. It looks again very similar to the Becky G palette as well as the Rendezvous palette. I did a comparison of all of them on my Instagram page a while ago, and it was kind of crazy how similar they all are. Next we have the Perception palette. This one was a collaboration that they did with Shayla, and it's a colorful palette, but again, it also has a lot of neutrals in it, and it reminds me a bit of the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. Next we have the Fortune palette. This one is mostly warm neutrals, and it actually is very similar to the Too Faced Gingerbread palette. I did a video with comparison swatches a while back of 7 different dupes for the Gingerbread palette, and this one was one of the closest ones. And then last but not least, we have the Fame palette. This one is a gorgeous cool tone palette that I reached for all summer long when I first got it. It just is so soft and easy to wear. And I love all the cool tones because cool tone palettes are kind of hard to find these days. All right, and then moving on to basket number 5, I have all of my LORAC palettes and JUVIA'S Place. So first we'll start with the Malibu palette. This is a really adorable travel palette, and you can use the face products for eyeshadows as well. I love the neutrals in this one. Next up is the Santa Monica face palette. This is another favorite of mine. I loved these cooler eyeshadows here, and then this coral blush was absolutely beautiful, and then the pink highlight worked really well for me also. And then the last one I have from this collection is Venice Beach. The eyeshadows in this one were a little bit deeper overall, and it also had this shimmery bronze highlight, which was too dark for me to use on my face, so I just used it as an eyeshadow also. Next we have one of the mini pro palettes. This one is the metal version. And this one had 8 shades, 6 of them were metallics, and then you have a matte black and a satin navy blue. And this is the mini matte pro palette. And then inside you have really beautiful matte neutral shades. And then I also have the Pro to Go palette. This is the top section of the palette. You have 6 eyeshadows, but you could also use these lighter shades as highlights as well. This one is a pearl finish, and then this one is matte. And then on the bottom side of the palette, you have 3 matte face powders, a coral blush, a pink blush, and then a matte bronzer. So this is a really great all-in-one travel palette. Next, I have the 4 Pro palettes, starting with number 1. And this is one of my favorite palettes of all time, not just the formula, which is absolutely perfect. It's so easy to blend, super pigmented, but also I just love how these pro palettes are laid out. You have an entire row of mattes along the top, and then the bottom row is all shimmer shades. They're just so buttery and creamy and amazing. And this original Pro palette just has all the neutrals you would ever need. Next up, we have the Pro 2 palette, and this one is more cool toned overall, and I always get questions about what my favorite cool tone palettes are, and this one definitely falls into that category. And then we have the Pro 3 palette. This one is a really neutral nude palette, and at first I wasn't crazy about it because at the time that this came out, there were all those really rich, warm tones, and this one just looked kind of boring, but the more I've played with it and used it, the more I absolutely love it. It's been one of my go-tos now for a while. And then the last one in this collection is the Pro 4. This one was released in 2018, and this one is warmer overall, but it's not a really deep, dark, warm palette, which I appreciate having fair skin. A lot of times it's harder for me to wear really dark, rich reds and oranges. This one has really beautiful warm tones, but they're not overwhelming for me. Next, we have the Unzipped collection. This is the original Unzipped palette. This is another one that falls into my favorite palettes of all time. The rosy tones in this one are just so beautiful. The formula is amazing. I just got so much use out of this palette. This is actually the second one that I've owned. I hit pan on a bunch of the shades in the first one, and I just love it. I will continue to repurchase this one as needed, as long as they make it. Next, we have Unzipped Gold. This one is more neutral with more browns and golds in it than the other one, which was more rosy tone. And while this one is really pretty, I do prefer the original Unzipped to this one. And then a few years back, they also came out with a few new Unzipped palettes. This one is Desert Sunset. And this one had really nice, warm, rich sunset colors. It was really pretty. I also had the Ocean Sunset one. And this one had really soft pastel-y colors. I wasn't a fan of this one though, even though I love the colors. I found the formula to be a little bit lacking. Some of the shades were difficult to pick up, especially these lighter ones on the top here. There are also 3 new Unzipped palettes that I got recently. The first one is Elegance. These are little 5-pan palettes, and I really haven't had a chance to try these out yet, but I plan to do a review on them soon. So this one is a little bit more on the cooler side. And then this one is Unzipped Brazen. This one has warmer tones with a really pretty peachy coral in the center. And then the last one is Unfiltered, and this one has some pretty pink rosy tones. Next we have the California Dreamin' palette. This one is a gorgeous cool tone palette. I'm kind of sad that they don't make it anymore because I love this palette and I've kind of been saving it. I try not to use it too much because I don't want to hit pan on any of these shades, but it's kind of silly in a way because it's going to expire. So I should probably start using this again. I just love that it's colorful yet also muted. It's beautiful. This one is the Shine Bright Pro Eyeshadow Palette. This one was released for holiday 2018. And LORAC had sent this to me. I really didn't get too much of a chance to play with it yet, but I definitely want to. It has some really beautiful colors in here. And then I only have one of the Mega Pro palettes. This is the Mega Pro 3. And these are just a huge version of the regular Pro palettes. And the reason I didn't get any more of these is just because they feel a little bit overwhelming to me. There's just so much to choose from. And I prefer slightly smaller palettes that are just edited down a little bit. And then this one is the Beauty and the Beast palette. I loved the packaging on this one. It was absolutely beautiful. It had the Pro formula in it as well, which is amazing. And just some overall really beautiful soft colors. And then the last LORAC palette that I have is the Pirates of the Caribbean palette. I used this one a lot when I first got it, but I haven't touched it in quite a few years, and some of the shades are a little broken and crumbling. I may end up decluttering this one just because of the age of it, but it is a really cool, fun palette. And then moving on to my JUVIA'S Place palettes. These are the most pigmented palettes in my collection. If you love super pigmented eyeshadows, you have to try these. They're absolutely amazing. So this first one is the Nubian palette. And I would describe this one as just a really warm, neutral palette. JUVIA'S Place is normally known for very colorful palettes, but this is one of the few really neutral ones that they have. Next we have the Saharan palette. This is another favorite of mine. It has some bright, bold pops of color, but also just some more subtle colors in here. It's just a really beautiful, unique color scheme. And then we have the Warrior palette. And then this is one of the other neutral palettes by them. The formula is just fantastic. It is so pigmented and beautiful. And then next up we have the Warrior 2. I actually just ordered this one in the mail recently, so I haven't had a chance to try it yet, but it's an all matte palette. And again, very neutral for the most part. It leans pretty warm tone, but there are also a few cool tones in here too. And then next we have the Deuce palette. And this one has some really pretty pastels and this bright pop of magenta. It's so beautiful. Next up we have the Saharan 2. And then this one is another really rich, warm palette with a few pops of blue. Next we have the Tribe, and this is the newest palette in their collection right now. And this one is another very colorful palette overall. You really only have 3 neutral shades here and the rest are all bright colors. And then next up is the Festival palette. This is one of the brightest ones in my collection, and really there are almost no neutrals in this palette, so I really don't reach for it too often, but if you love bright colors, I think you'll really enjoy this one because the formula is awesome. And then last but not least is the Magic palette. This is another one that if you love color, you're really gonna like this one. It's mostly all color except for just a few neutrals here. You do have a matte transition shade and also a matte ivory, as well as this shimmery bronzy shade. It's really, really pretty. All right, and then the sixth and final basket in that unit is Makeup Revolution palettes. This is probably the biggest one that I have by far, so I'm gonna try to go through these as quickly as I can just because I feel like this video is getting so super long already. And the next 10 palettes I'm gonna show you are all part of the Reloaded collection, and I really love these. They're $7 each, and the pigmentation is surprisingly good for the price. I really enjoy using these a lot. So this one is Iconic Vitality, and this one is sort of a dupe for the Modern Renaissance palette. Next we have Velvet Rose, and this one is a dupe for the Soft Glam palette. And then the Iconic Division palette is very, very similar to Anastasia's Subculture. Neutrals 2 is just a really rich, warm palette with a lot of oranges, reds, and pinks. And then the Visionary palette reminds me a lot of Norvina. It's definitely not an exact dupe, but it has the same overall vibe. Neutrals 3 is another really rich, warm, kind of fall-looking palette. I don't know that this is necessarily a dupe for anything, but it is a really nice palette if you like these really deep, rich, warm shades. And then Basic Mattes is just as the name suggests, it's just a basic matte neutral palette. And then the Affection palette is one of the newest ones that just came out a little while ago. I haven't used this one yet, but this one is an all shimmer palette. And then the last one I have is the Iconic Fever palette, and this one reminds me a lot of the Naked Heat or the Tartelette Toasted palette. Next up we have the Light and Shade palette, and as you may have guessed, this one is a dupe for the Kat Von D Shade and Light palette. Next we have the Neutrals versus Neutrals palette. This one got so much hype, and I don't know if I just got a bad one, but I just didn't really see it. I didn't feel like the formula was quite what I was expecting because it was so super hyped at the time. I really don't hear anybody talking about this one anymore, but if you guys have this one and loved it, definitely let me know down in the comments below. And then this one is the Iconic Pro 2 palette, and this one is a shade for shade dupe for the LORAC Pro 2 palette, which is the cool toned one that I showed you just a few minutes ago. And really the formula on this one doesn't come close to LORAC, but it's not bad. You can definitely build it up and make it work and create some of the same looks with it. And then this one is the Iconic 3 palette. This one is pretty much a shade for shade dupe for the Urban Decay Naked 3 palette. And then I also have Iconic 2. This one is a shade for shade dupe for the Urban Decay Naked 2 palette. This one is Iconic Dreams. It's super old. I believe I ordered it off the UK website even before Makeup Revolution was at Ulta, so we're going back many, many years. I probably shouldn't even be using this palette at this point, but it just has some of these hunter green shades in here and then a lot of neutrals as well. I thought it was really pretty at the time, but now I'm looking at it and kind of thinking, I don't really need this one. And then next up is the Fortune Favors the Brave palette. This is another one that got a lot of hype, but I just kind of didn't see it. I don't know if mine was just a bad batch, but I really didn't find this one to be super pigmented at all. So I hardly ever used it. You can see some of the shades down here have some use, but then there's some that I didn't even touch because I was just like not too impressed. So next up, I have a whole bunch of the chocolate palettes in their I Heart Chocolate series, starting with this one, which is called I Heart Chocolate. This is the first one that they came out with in the line, and it's an exact shade for shade dupe of Too Faced's original chocolate bar palette. And then this one is the Death by Chocolate palette. I don't think this one is a dupe for anything, but I could be wrong. Definitely let me know. But this one is a really cool tone palette. Next up, we have the Salted Caramel palette. And this one is a shade for shade dupe for the Too Faced Semi-Sweet Chocolate Bar palette. And I have to say, these are pretty good as far as formula. They definitely don't match up to Too Faced, but I think if you build them up a little bit or wet some of the shimmer shades, they can be just as intense on the eyes. And then next we have the Mint Chocolate palette. And this one has some really beautiful jewel tones mixed with neutrals. And then the next one is the Golden Bar palette. This one is overall a very neutral palette with some gold and bronze shades mixed in. Next up is the Chocolate Rose Gold palette. And the color story of this one reminds me a lot of Huda Beauty's Rose Gold palette, although I don't think this one is an exact shade for shade dupe. And then next we have the Violet Chocolate palette. And this one is one of my favorites in the chocolate collection. I just love all these pinks and purples mixed with neutrals. They're just really rich, beautiful colors. Next up is Chocolate and Peaches. And this one is a really close dupe for the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. Next up, we have the Naked Chocolate palette. This is another neutral palette, but this one has a lot of rosy tones in here, so all the browns are a little bit rosier. You have some mauves, some pinks, so it's another really, really pretty one. And then next we have Macaron. I love this one. It has a really oceany vibe to it. I love all the turquoise and blue mixed with all the neutrals. It's gorgeous. Next we have Lemon Drizzle. This is another gorgeous one. This is a newer one as well, and it reminds me a lot of the Natasha Denona Sunset palette or the ColourPop Yes Please. It just has those really rich warm tones with the pops of yellow and orange and coral. And then we have Cranberries and Chocolate. This one actually launched in the fall of 2018 as part of their chocolate vault for the holidays, but they did make this one available as a single now, so you can order it off of their website. It's not available at Ulta yet. Next we have the S'mores palette. This is another one of my favorites in the line. It's a completely all neutral palette, but I've used this one a ton, probably more than all the others. And unfortunately, this one is part of the chocolate vault. It is still available currently, but once it's gone, and they haven't released this one yet as a single, but I really hope that they do. And then the last chocolate palette I have is the Strawberry Cheesecake one. This one is a really pretty pink palette, and this one is also an exclusive to the Vault. So if you're interested in this one and the S'mores palette, definitely try to order the Vault before it's gone. It is on sale at half off now, and you get a whole bunch of these palettes in it. I believe it's $55 at the moment. It also comes with the Cranberries and Chocolate, the Lemon Drizzle, the Macaron, and the Salted Caramel. So you get 6 of these palettes in there, plus some face products and lip products as well. So it's a really good deal. All right, so then moving on, we have the Soph X Revolution palette. This is the original one, and I really love the formula of these. I think it's a little step above all of the rest of their palettes. It's really, really good, and I love all of the colors in here. And then this one is the second Soph X collab that they did, and I don't know why, but the outside keeps peeling off of this one. This one is another really gorgeous palette. I love the color scheme. You do have some muted colors in here, as well as a few pops of brights, and again, formula-wise, this one is really, really good. Then we have the 3 Jewel Collection palettes that were released for holiday 2018. This one is the deluxe one. And again, I thought the formula on these was beautiful, especially these ones along the top row here. They're just super rich and buttery and incredibly pigmented, as well as these other shades in here too. I was just really overall impressed with these. I did a whole video on them. If you'd like to check that out, I will leave it linked either above or down in the description box. This one was the Opulent one. And this one had an overall more cool toned look to it with a lot of pinks and purples. And then the third one in the collection is Gilded. And this one was warmer in tone with a lot of golds and bronzes and a few pops of coral. And then last but not least, we have our Emily Noel collabs. The first one is the Emily Edit Needs palette. And this one was a full face palette with 6 eyeshadows, bronzer, blush, highlight, and then a setting powder. And this is just a really nice overall travel palette because you get everything that you need to do your whole face. And then we have the Emily Edit Wants palette. And this one also had a gorgeous selection of colors. I think she did a great job choosing them. These are all colors that I would wear, nothing too bright or too crazy, but I do love creating looks with this palette. It's really inspiring. All right, guys, so that does it for part 1 of my eyeshadow palette collection. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button. Also, stay tuned for part 2. I'm going to leave the link for it down in the description box below as soon as it's filmed, so definitely check back for that one, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!